Hi and welcome to 5 Frames From. Today we're talking about Spike Lee's film Do the Right Thing, released in 1989. Now, although Spike Lee had some success with films like She's Gotta Have It and School Days, it was Do the Right Thing that really cemented his reputation as an up-and-coming director, and the film is really considered very culturally significant. But as a film, it's quite problematic in that many of the characters aren't particularly likeable. And Mookie, Spike Lee plays Mookie, is just one example of a character who is flawed in some ways. So we'll be exploring that today. But before we do, I think it's important to think about the context of this film. There are many references to social and historical and political events at the time, and you might want to look into some of the meanings of some of the graffiti, for example, on the walls. So we see things like Tawana told the truth, which is referencing Tawana Brawley and the accusation of rape that she made. There's also references to the Mayor of New York City and the election at this time. The film itself is meant to be based on the story of Michael Griffith, a young black male who was chased from a pizzeria and run out into the road and was run over by an oncoming car. So there's a lot of background to this film. The context is particularly important. Equally, before we start to look at our frames, it might be worth thinking about the critical reception of the film. Some people felt that Spike Lee had made a very even-handed film exploring race in America, raising some interesting ideas, but others were convinced that the release of the film would cause race riots and violence all over New York. Now, moving on to our 5 frames, the first one I've chosen is this one of Rosie Perez, who plays Tina in this film. Now, Tina is very much, we can see from the facial expression here, an angry young woman. She's got a lot to be angry about, a lot to protest about. She's a woman, she's Puerto Rican, she's a single mother. She's surrounded by people that frustrate her, and her anger is seen several times in the film where she sort of explodes at her mother and Mookie. In many ways, she's a typical character in Do the Right Thing because she's very beautiful, very sexy, but at the same time she's kind of represented as this kind of nagging girlfriend who is desperate to see her partner. So that frustration that she feels comes across. In this shot then, it's very difficult to capture a particular shot of Tina because of her movement. It's so energetic, and apparently Spike Lee made her do this moment several times over, so some of that frustration on her face is probably real frustration. But it's very energetic. But here I've managed to freeze frame it on this really quite aggressive facial expression we can see in the medium close up. There are times when she's got kind of boxing gloves on and shorts. There are times when she's closer to the camera and she stares at us in quite a defiant, aggressive way. So, you know, this is a really strong opening to the film. That combined with the soundtrack, Fight the Power by Public Enemy, it makes a really strong opening to the film, and it calls us to kind of stand up and protest about the things that we feel are injustices. Finally, to mention here, the use of colour, the lighting, the red light obviously sets the scene for the film. Obviously the film is based on the hottest day of the year in this neighbourhood, and that red lighting already shows the heat, the tension, I suppose the danger if we're thinking about kind of film school techniques of the day ahead. So after the title sequence, we're introduced to Mr. Senior Love Daddy, played by Samuel L. Jackson, and we have an extreme close-up of him to begin with, his lips and an alarm clock, and he tells us to wake up, wake up, wake up. And there's a double meaning here. Obviously, it's the start of the day. He's a radio DJ. He is calling people to wake up, but at the same time, he's calling to the audience. He's saying to the audience, wake up to the politics around you. Wake up to what's going on in society. Wake up and take a stand. So the theme of kind of doing the right thing, whatever the right thing might be, already is being established, and the audience are being invited to kind of think about what doing the right thing might be. So I've chosen this image of Love Daddy because we can see through the glass into the various mise-en-scene around him. The fact that we see the reflection in the glass reminds us that Love Daddy is an observer of everything that happens in the neighbourhood. He's an observer and someone who comments on things in the neighbourhood. And actually much of the film's common sense comes from Love Daddy. So for example, he says at one point, "Are we not going to love each other?" And so he's very much on the side of love rather than hate. The fact that he works for Love Radio, for example, is testament to that. In the foreground, we can see the various hats that Love Daddy wears in the film, and they are said to sort of represent the kind of different roles that he plays at different times. In the background, we can see a celebration of significant black musicians. We can see posters and album covers. And this kind of pride in the contribution of black musicians to musical history is also shown during the roll call sequence, where Love Daddy just reads out this long list of amazing, talented musicians who have contributed to popular culture. Now, I've chosen this image of Bugging Out and Sal because actually it makes me laugh. There's a moment here where there's no dialogue between the two of them and they communicate through gestures, both of them sort of looking at the pizza and questioning each other. I think this really sums up Bugging Out's characteristics, the fact that he goes into the pizza every day and potentially every day quibbles about the price, even though he knows how much it costs. Now, this is before Bugging Out notices that there are no black brothers on the wall, so this is before he begins to protest, and already he can be seen as quite an irritating character. I think that's reflected in his name. He bugs people, he's annoying, he pesters people. His protest seems to be a little bit sort of full of hot air, especially when in a few frames' time we see him framed against a huge image of Mike Tyson in the background. So the fact that there are no black brothers, as he calls them, on the wall here in South is kind of juxtaposed with this giant image of a black brother on the wall in the neighbourhood. So his protest seems to be sort of a little outdated, perhaps, a little ineffectual, and as I say, hot air. He's blowing something up out of proportion, but of course that has huge consequences for the day ahead. This two-shot of Sal and Bugging Out with the pizza in the middle shows them standing in competition. We also have these codes of gesture with Bugging Out kind of suggesting that he wants a response, some kind of response to how much the pizza costs. I think also it's probably worth mentioning costume here. They're both fairly sort of stereotypically dressed for the types of characters they are, with their clothing reflecting their ethnic background. So I've chosen this shot because it's an interesting moment in the film and it releases the tension that's been building up until this moment. And I think this sort of wide shot shows the street, shows the vibrancy and the colour of the street and the excitement of all the young people gathered together. It's a real sense of community and fun at this point. The composition of the shot, we've got obviously a group shot, people in the foreground and the background, and the sort of just mischief making of these boys that are able to sort of direct the jet of water at the different people. Now, as I said, this moment breaks the tension in the film that's been building up to this point, but of course then the tension does start again. At the end of the film, we reach another climax where the community come together, but of course this time it's in a much more destructive way, and it's not water that's the central element there, it's fire as the pizzeria burns down. So this kind of really juxtaposes what happens later. Finally, to mention here, of course, is that this scene is sort of interrupted by the white guy in the vintage car and his complaints to the police. And as he complains, obviously he's not able to name any of the young people involved because they are all the same to him. So again, reflecting the racism of different members of society. And so for my final frame, I've chosen this one of Radio Raheem and Mookie. And considering there's so much left of the film, this seems a slightly strange one to end on, but I've chosen it because of several reasons really. Firstly, we see many tracking shots of Mookie as he wanders around the streets delivering his pizza. And so I think here we see that Mookie is this middleman. He is sort of the go-between between Sal, who is slightly an outsider within the community. We see him drive into the street at the beginning, showing that he lives somewhere else. So he's this sort of go-between between Sal and everybody else who wants their slices delivered. And as he kind of walks the neighbourhood, we get to meet different characters and we get to see the kind of different places where people live. So I've chosen it because of that and because of everything that Mookie brings to the film. Equally, I wanted to concentrate on Radio Raheem here, and this is a great sequence with the love and hate rings, which reference an earlier film starring Robert Mitchum, where he plays this preacher who uses the love and hate speech in order to win people over, even though deep down he is not a good man at all. But when Radio Raheem delivers the love and hate speech, he delivers it in much more kind of aggressive way, with these kind of boxing movements, these jabs of the hand towards the camera, and it really feels like he's addressing us. Now, of course, Radio Raheem does die at the end of the film, and we do feel outraged at his death. You know, he dies at the hands of the police through the chokehold. But equally, he's another problematic character in that we don't necessarily like Radio Raheem. He seems a little bit of a bully at times, especially when he's talking to the Korean shopkeepers. Here, as I say, he seems quite aggressive, even though he's delivering this speech about love and sort of love overcoming hate. But what Spike Lee does is present these characters who are not polarised, you know, they're not either good or either bad. He's kind of suggesting that everyone has got kind of flaws and you know, unlikable features to their characteristics, but that nobody deserves to die. And nobody deserves to die at the hands of the police. And Spike Lee does claim that people were, at the time of watching the film, more shocked at the burning of the pizzeria than the death of Radio Raheem. So that raising questions about what we value. So thank you for listening to my brief look at Do the Right Thing. I hope you found it useful for your studies and interesting. Obviously, it's shameful to think that a lot of the issues raised in this film are still relevant today. There are still inequalities that need to be fought and protests that need to be made. And so I guess I leave you with the thoughts of fight the power. Anyway, thanks for listening. Bye for now.